Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and in this particular episode, I'm going to essentially review the annual NATO summit that was recently concluded in The Hague, Netherlands. This was a very special orchestrated NATO summit in which all the European countries basically designed the NATO summit to please and pamper Donald Trump. The idea of this summit seems to be to reduce the gap between the United States and Europe on the NATO issue. The NATO nations have been worried that Donald Trump might either withdraw from NATO as he threatened during his first term, or he may dilute his commitment to the NATO and the security of Europe. So that was a major concern given the fact that there is so much divergence between Europe and the United States on trade, on security issues, on things that Europeans think are very important, such as Ukraine's future, Ukraine's security, Ukraine's economic development, Ukraine's membership in EU as well as NATO. So all of these things seem to be the most important things as far as Europe is concerned, and Donald Trump does not see it that way. Donald Trump's goal seems to be essentially to bring back manufacturing to the United States, to make America more shall we say, self-reliant when it comes to national security-related manufacturing, to reduce the influence of China, and actually to improve U.S. relations with Russia. So while Europeans are trying to reduce the influence and the power of Russia, to marginalize it, to treat it as their enemy, Donald Trump seems to be going in the opposite direction. He wants to make Russia a kind of a partner of the United States, or at least reduce the tensions between the US and Russia that existed during the time of Joe Biden. So, so this was, in that sense, you can say, a very unusual NATO summit. For example, the previous statements issued by NATO summits run into like 30, 40 paragraphs. This was very succinct, just 5 paragraphs. So that kind of gives you an idea that they went through these motions with the desire to ensure that Trump does not damage NATO rather than move forward. And there was also a lot of sucking up to Donald Trump. They gave him a royal treatment, a dinner in the palace. He got to spend a night in the royal palace in Netherlands, etc. People were all basically acting like sycophants. So it was interesting to see as to how Europeans really were pampering Donald Trump. So there are a few takeaways that I want to comment on. The biggest achievement really is, on paper at least, the commitment by all NATO countries except Spain that they will increase their defense spending to 5% of their GDP. That will be huge. The United States GDP is $30 trillion. The Europeans are about 20. So you're looking at $50 trillion GDP. 5% of that would be about $2.5 trillion budget. So the current defense budget of NATO would be $2.5 trillion, or 2.5 times that of the United States current defense budget. That's huge spending. Most European countries are going to struggle to meet with that, but they're going to review it in 2029, which means the review will most probably say that most countries fail to reach that target, but the Europeans clearly are hoping that Donald Trump will not be president in 2029. His term ends in 2028. So the review will be with a new president in the White House. Spain is the only country which objected to it, and Donald Trump basically berated Spain and threatened to use tariffs and economic tools at his disposal to basically tame Spain and try to force it to meet this benchmark. But nevertheless, this was the big achievement of this NATO, that at least countries on paper were committed to increase their defense budget. The 5% defense budget, as I said in the preview, basically is 3.5 hardcore defense budget on operations, military equipment, on salaries of soldiers, etc., and then 1.5% on cyber, economic resilience, etc. So related. So basically, it just means that they have to move from 2% commitment to 3.5%. and then they can just add some existing items and saying, oh, this is part of the 1.5%. So basically, they have to raise the budget by 1.5%. I'm not very sure whether they will be able to do that. European economies are not really doing very well. Their growth rates are, for example, Germany's growth rate is practically zero. So, and France is about 1%, and Britain is just about there. So I'm not very sure that they can. And given the size of their welfare states and the burden of welfare activities, I'm not very sure they can make that benchmark. But one interesting thing that the Europeans did this time was to completely, not completely, but to a great extent, marginalize the Ukraine issue. There was no talk about Ukraine inevitably becoming member of NATO or rushing or coming up with a fast track to make Ukraine a member of NATO. So that seems to have been dropped from the agenda here, and also the language that in the past focused on treating Russia as an enemy, even that basically was sidelined. And Zelensky himself was not invited to the main dinner, even though he did get to meet in an extended meeting with Trump at the end of the summit. We have yet to get details of what really transpired in that, but there seems to be that Trump is softening his position, and he might extend some Patriot missile support to Ukraine. We will see what happens with that. Uh, Even though Russia continues to remain a designated long-term threat, there was no specifics of what NATO would be doing with regards to Russia. But it appears that the whole purpose of this summit was basically to avoid giving Trump an excuse or an opportunity to bash NATO or diminish its importance. NATO is very critical to Western global hegemony and the security of Europe, given the rise of China and the increasing military aggressiveness of Russia. And so NATO is important for Europe. I don't think it is that important for the US, but there are lots of people in America who really think that the purpose of the United States is basically to protect Europe and Israel. Apparently, that's what they think. And many of these people are in power. They are in the Senate. They are in the government. They are in the executive. They hardly ever think about what is in the interest of the U.S. Often they are all funded heavily by lobbies for foreign countries. They take money from special interests, and so basically they have tried to make a U.S. military and economic power as something that can be sold to foreign countries by our own politicians for the right price. Uh, what was missing was a serious discussion about the United States' role with regards to Iran or the Middle East. But given the fact that NATO is about transatlantic relations and security of Europe, we can say, okay, fine, they don't want to talk about what happened with regards to Iran. But the European nations did meet with the foreign minister of Iran just before the summit. So I thought that there might be some discussion about that, but that was not that then really didn't happen. We will see going forward. There are at least three more summits that Donald Trump will attend. Uh, and the war in Russia and Ukraine continues. The Europeans on their own are still committed to funding Ukraine and imposing new sanctions against Russia. We will see whether the United States will be with them or not with them or even against them. And there is a new development which I find very interesting where European countries and Canada have come together to come up with a defense allocation of 150 billion euros, about roughly close to $175 billion, which they're going to spend collectively on acquiring new weapons, basically for Europe and Canada. But one of the caveats in that understanding is that only 35% of weapons can be bought from outside the signatories to that procurement agreement, which means that they have limited how much weapons you can buy from the United States. So only one third of that can be bought. So maybe only $60 billion can be spent on buying F-35s or other American weapons, and about $120 billion will be spent on basically developing domestic or European and Canadian defense industry. So that was an interesting thing, and I thought Trump would take a shot at it. Maybe it has not caught his eye. So it'll be interesting to see when that deal is completely finalized, because Canada has to agree to certain European Union trade conditions before it can become part of that deal. But the Europeans, with or without Canada, will be moving forward to essentially increase their self-reliance on defense equipment. So we will keep an eye on what's going on. And so I hope you found this review of the NATO summit useful. So please subscribe to Conversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.